Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Most of you know I was in a pretty bad auto accident recently. The doctor has not cleared me to get back out on the water yet, but I am starting to get my mind back. I'm starting to get some more clarity. I wanted to jump back into it with you guys, start using my brain, exercising a little bit. So today we are going to talk about shaky head fishing. We're going to talk about worm fishing in the summertime. When to do it, why to do it, the gear that I use to do it. Unfortunately, like I said, I haven't been cleared to actually take you out on the water today, but we're almost there. So let's jump into the baits themselves. Summer worm fishing, I love doing it. I love frogging, I love heavy flipping, but there is something special about just relaxing and unwinding, tying on a shaky head with a confidence worm, and just sticking fish. So technique-wise, I try to keep it as simple as I can. I keep my color simple, my gear simple, even my baits fairly simple. I'm going to use all straight tail worms in the summertime. Personal preference. Some guys love big curly tail worms. Personally, I really like that straight tail worm. I mean, brand after brand after brand, I'm throwing straight tails. So the big differences between them are going to be size and color. I'm not super brand specific. I have 3 or 4 brands that I throw a lot. I throw basically the baits that I throw the Strike King. I throw the bull worm in both the 8 and 10 inch. And then in Strike King, I also throw the fat baby finesse worm. That's this one that I have rigged up right here. Great set of options there. Strike King really stepped up their game in soft plastics over the last couple of years. Next brand, of course, is going to be Zoom. I use the Magnum trick worm, the regular trick worm, and then both the Magnum and regular swamp crawler. That's bait we've talked about a ton. The swamp crawler just flat catches them. And then last but not least, I use net bait. And the net bait worm, there are some very specific reasons I use that. We'll come back to that. But let's talk color first, and then we'll jump into the specifics of the gear and when and why and how I'm throwing it. Color, I try to keep it extremely simple. I'm basically going to break my entire summer fishing down, not by color, but by type. I'm either throwing light colored worms, natural colored worms, or dark worms. Specifically what I mean by that, if I'm going dark, I'm either throwing Junebug, black, or black blue. That's it. But a dark worm, I think between those three, it almost doesn't matter which one. You're either throwing a dark one or you're throwing natural. And in natural, I'm either talking plums, green pumpkins, or watermelon, or some variety thereof. And I don't really get too specific. You know, if I go to pick up green pumpkin and they're out of them, but they have green pumpkin, green and purple flake, I don't care. That's green pumpkin. If I want watermelon seed and all they have is watermelon red flake, typically, I don't care. I don't get really hung up because I think summertime fish tend to be aggressive. They've got warm water temps. If they are going to feed, they're going to lash out. They tend not to play around as much as other times of the year. They either do it or they don't do it. There's no in between. Plus, I fish my shaky heads pretty aggressively most of the time, or my worms in general. It's not always a shaky head. I'll throw them on a Texas rig as well. But given a choice, I throw shaky heads in the summertime. I only use 3 hooks, by the way. The 3 that I use, that's a Canterbury. And down in the video description, I'll link you everything. You guys don't have to be trying to keep up with all this stuff. I throw a Canterbury for my standard, so like a trick worm or a swamp crawler or a fat baby finesse. That's, in fact, that's what that fat baby finesse is rigged on right there. Then I throw a stand-up head, which is basically just a bigger, beefier hook. And then I'll throw, depending on how big the worm is, when I throw the bull worms or the Magnum trick worm, then I'm gonna jump over and I switched to a Strike King, still with the screw lock. I really like Shaky Heads that have a screw lock, personally. Then the Strike King, you know, they just offer it in a bunch of sizes, and that's how I'm able to throw all those bigger worms. So I keep it very, very simple. 3 different head designs, 3 different hooks, but all very similar, basically just getting larger to adjust to the different worms. Color, we keep very simple. And then the baits themselves, also very simple. All straight tail, all similar colors. I'm really just changing sizes more than anything. I don't care about the difference between an 8-inch bullworm and a Magnum trick worm. You know, they're here, I'll pull a couple out. They're very, very similar sizes and profiles. Okay, so 8-inch bull, Magnum trick. This is a Zoom, this is a Strike King, very similar. Green pumpkin, black flake, green pumpkin, purple, and green flake. Who cares? I mean, truly practically the same bait. I'm just adjusting the size of the hooks to match the baits. Now, why a little worm versus a big worm? 2 things. If I'm catching a ton of fish, I go bigger. Second, if I want to catch a big fish, I go bigger. I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, I'm not even going to try and complicate it beyond that. That's it. If you want to get a bigger bite, throw the bigger worm. It's not that you won't get big bites on the smaller worm, but you're selecting for bigger bites. If you're passing in front of the same amount of fish, you're more likely, if you have, you know, a bunch of little ones and a couple big ones lined up, and you're throwing a little worm through there, the little ones are often faster. They often are more aggressive. They'll pick it up quicker than the big ones. But if you throw that bigger worm, maybe some of those small ones will pass on it, and you'll land in front of more of the big ones more often. It's not that a big one won't eat a little worm versus a big worm. It's not that a little one won't eat a big worm versus a little one. But more little ones will pass. And you just end up spending more time not in the mouth of a little fish, where you have the potential of getting in the mouth of a bigger fish. Simple. Now, I did say briefly there that there's a reason I throw the T-Mac. That's that net bait worm. And I love this worm. So, this bait and a Zoom trick worm, basically identical. They smell different. This one has more of a plastic smell. This one has like a little bit of a fruity smell. But essentially the same bait, right? Little tiny bit of size difference. Here is the difference. Because this is going to save you, worm guys, a little bit of frustration. Not a lot of frustration, but a little bit. Here's a tip you're going to enjoy. All right, let's get my regular Shaky Head. Shaky Head with a screw lock. If I go to put a Zoom trick worm on a Shaky Head, the head of that bait is so narrow that it really won't thread on there, and I have to just pinch part of that worm off. Sometimes more than once, until I get it to where it's fat enough to really take that screw lock. Okay? Super basic, super genius. Thank you, NetBait. They made the head of the worm fatter. It is a trick worm. I mean, seriously, it's the same stinking worm. Very, very similar colors available, except you don't have to do anything to the worm. It will thread onto any Shaky Head straight out of the package. That was smart. So, quick tip for you guys. Save yourselves a little tiny headache, but if you are on a wide open bite, the difference between changing or biting the tops off of 50 worms a day versus 0 worms a day, that's a lot of plastic that you don't want in your mouth, or you don't want to take the time to pinch off. It's a nice option. Okay, now when, where, why? Basically, guys, if I'm shaky head fishing or worm fishing, for that matter, in the summertime, I'm focused around shallow rock. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, there's a ton of fish on shallow rock in the summertime. Especially on lakes that have high populations of bait fish. They tend to corral them up on that stuff. It's really easy for them to feed on it. The bait fish have nowhere to hide. So once they get pushed up there, especially if you're in a river system, any of the dammed up lakes that have current in them, Even here in California, a lot of our lakes have current. Even though they're not river systems, they draw a lot of water. Any power plant lake where they draw a lot of water, that shallow rock is going to get bait pulled up onto it or wind blown up onto it. The fish are very aggressive there. That's where I like to throw a shaky head. I tend not to throw it around grass, and it's not that it doesn't work. It's that when I get around grass, let's be real, I'm either throwing a Texas rig creature bait, or I'm punching and flipping, or I'm frogging, right? I mean, you don't have to throw it on that stuff, so I don't throw it. Rock, to me, is where that summertime worming really shines. Now, you brush pile guys, it's gonna apply to you, obviously. Weed line guys, fishing that outer edge, fishing deeper water, it works fantastic. Fishing on ledges, but if they're on the top of the ledge, I focus on that shaky head. If they get off the side, I start deep cranking, doing some of those different things. So again, I focus on rock. As far as actually fishing the bait, there's a handful of different ways to fish it. You can just slow pull them, and we're gonna get to a couple really important things right after this, but you can just slow pull them on bottom. Basically just drag it, reel up your slack, drag it, reel up your slack. Second way, of course, it's a shaky head. Shake it, right? Just work that thing and then let it sit. Reel up your slack. Shake it, reel down. Third way is very aggressive. I mean, we are being hard on that worm. Full on double rip, reel up your slack. Double rip, reel up your slack. Super hard. I mean, as hard as you could fish jig in the summertime, just ripping that thing. When they eat it, they almost always eat it as it's falling back down. So almost every time you're gonna rip, reel down, and there's gonna be a fish on it. Or you're gonna rip, go to reel down, and you're gonna have nothing but slack, because they come so fast to eat it that they drive that bait forward and they leave you on a slack line. It's a really fun way to catch them. A lot of people don't do that with a worm. A lot of people think of a worm as finesse, and it is, but it doesn't have to be. You can get very aggressive with a worm in summer. I tend to go to heavier weights for doing that. So you wanna typically upsize your worm, go to a much heavier head. That's where some of the Strike King heads really shine, because they offer them in those heavy weights. Now that guy with an 8-inch worm on it, I mean, you can really pop that guy, and it'll dart back to bottom. Very aggressive, very fast moving. It's fast moving up, but it also crashes back down quickly. They just snap react to that thing. And that is something that most people's fish have never seen, because most people are not out fishing a worm that way. Now, the bite is interesting in the summer. You would think, because they've got all this energy and they're in hot water, they just smash that thing. A lot of times that's not the case. Now maybe they do, maybe they hit it hard on your lake, but a lot of fisheries they don't. Summertime, they tend to just really gently eat that bait. Now if you're really snapping it up, they come hard at it, but if you're shaking it or you're just pulling it, either one of those, they're really soft on the bite. They're very easy to miss them. So I throw a shaky head on literally my most sensitive rod. I use an 852 NRX. I use an Aldebaran reel, and we're talking about a very high-end combo. And it's because the bite is so light and I don't want to miss it. And in the summertime, there are some really big fish that eat the worm. I don't want to miss a single bite. So I use the highest end gear that I can afford to use. And everybody's budget is different, but I recommend using the highest end gear for summer worming that you can afford. Whether that's a $100 setup, whether that's a $300 setup, whether it's a $1,000 setup, it doesn't matter. But the most you can afford, the most sensitivity that you can get, is going to be very advantageous for you. Now, if you are on a budget, here is a tip. We talked about this in the winter time, maybe 6 months ago, 7 months ago, 8 months ago, something like that. It was early winter. Tim and I did a video together talking about how to use a longer, more limber rod to see the bite before you can feel it. Because this worm bite that I'm talking about, I mean, they'll come up and they just mouth it, and then they just sit there and hold it. So what you're actually feeling on your rod, you very rarely feel the tick. I mean, maybe you do, maybe they tick it, maybe they pop it, but most of the time you're just gonna be picking that thing up or shaking it, and it's just gonna get weird. It's gonna feel like grass. It's gonna feel like you're hung up on a rock, except it's soft. It's got a little bit of give to it. Anytime that worm feels, we'll call it strange. Anytime it feels strange, you better hammer home. But again, if you're on a budget, if you use a little longer rod, I throw the worm on a fairly short rod, shorter than most of my techniques. But if you're on a budget, switch to a 7.3 to a 7.6, anywhere in there. A little bit longer rod, a little more limber, a little more tip. And instead of waiting to feel that tick bite, watch the tip of that rod. When you pull it, if it looks like this every time you pull it, and then one time it looks like this when you start to pull it, set the hook. Hook sets are free. Anytime it gets weird, swing on them. But that longer, can you guys hear these birds? This is insane. I must be under a bird's nest. It is going crazy up here in this tree. Seriously. Back on track. Anytime it gets a little weird, if you've got that longer rod, it's going to show it sooner. If you're fishing a 6 foot, 6.5, 7 foot rod and it's pretty stout in the tip, it's not going to have a lot of give to it, and they're really going to have to be on it before you see it. Now you may feel it, but you won't see it. But that longer, softer rod, it's going to start loading early even before you feel it. It will make all the difference for you. Guys, again, I keep my worm fishing simple. Lights and darks. I'm only adjusting size of worm to try and upsize my bite. And I'm only adjusting the heads themselves to adjust to the size of the worm. Use the most sensitive rod that you can. Focus on that rockier stuff. You're going to see great results this summer. Down in the video description, like I said, we'll link all the gear. I'm also going to link what heads I match to what baits, as well as the colors that I like in those baits. I'll link you all my gear, just like always. Guys, I really appreciate you. I'm sorry that I'm not back on the water yet. I wish I was. I mean, the bite is rocking out there, and I wish I was out there on it. But I'm glad that we could just sit down and really delve into one of these topics. I hope it helps you guys this summer get out there and stick some more fish. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We'll talk to you soon.